The night. It came alive. It was a cold October night that Emily first heard the sound. It was so faint that it could hardly be described as a scratching, barely audible against the background noises made by nails as they were dragged across the wooden floor of her house. She lived alone at the edge of town, between a dense forest and a dirt-winding road. The house was always her haven, a refuge away from all the noisiness of the city. But tonight was something different. Again, the sound was there, this time louder and more insistent. Emily put her book down, narrowing her eyes as she strained to hear. Probably it was just a wayward branch scraping against the side of the house. Winds had been picking up lately. Still, something about the sound bugged her. It wasn't rhythmic like branches swaying in the wind. It was purposeful. She stood up slowly from the couch, thinking for a minute or two. Then she began to move toward the noise. It sounded as if it came from a short distance through the hallway just outside her bedroom door. She edged ahead one step and then another, the beating of her heart rising with each one. The house seemed colder now, heavy and dead still. As she reached the door of her room, the scratching ceased. Emily stood there silently, hand on the doorknob, unsure whether she opened it. She knew it was irrational, but something inside her started gnawing at this gut-level feeling that something was very wrong. She opened the door. Nothing happened. It looked exactly as she'd left it. Her bed neatly made, the curtains drawn shut inside, no semblance of disturbance anywhere. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Of course, it was nothing. She must be just being paranoid, letting her imagination get the better of her. Shaking her head, she turned to leave, but then there it was again. Scratching. Closer now. Louder. She scanned the room for a moment, trying to locate the origin. It was coming from under her bed. A wave of fear washed over her, and she couldn't budge for 1 minute. She could hear her pulse thumping in her ears as she stared at the edge of the bed. Every reasonable part of her mind screamed to run out of this room and leave. But it was curiosity and an undeniable sense of fear that kept her rooted on the spot. Slowly, Emily knelt down. She was thudding with her heart in her chest. Her white hands trembled, and with fingers which could have touched every key on the keyboard at once, she pulled back the bed's skirt. Empty. No animal, no man, or anything was hidden under the bed. Dark wooden floor seemed just to spread out in that space of the room, seemingly endless and inviting. The scratch was still there, though, but this time it sounded like the noise was coming from inside the floor. Emily stepped back from the bed, her mind racing. Is there something under the house? Some animal trapped between the floorboards? No, it doesn't make sense. The house is on a solid foundation, no crawl space or basement underneath it. She dashed to the corner of the room, digging into her pocket for her phone. When she turned it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. It didn't respond, even though the power remained on. Panic started churning in her stomach. And then the lights dimmed. Not completely, but just enough that she could tell the brightness had changed. Perhaps the house was playing tricks on her, she thought. The scratching began to sound frantic, aggressive, as if whatever lay beneath the floor might be frantically trying to come out of there. Emily's breath caught watching the floorboards. And then something shifted. The wood at the center of the room pushed up out of control as it creaked under the torture, like some monster from down below was ripping its way up into that small room. She stumbled back until her back hit the wall, her eyes shocked with a bit of incredulity. The floorboards started cracking, and a dark liquid oozed through the cracks. The smell was foul, like rotting flesh and decay. The scratches sounded now like clawing as the bulge in the floor increased and became more pronounced. Emily's legs were weak, but she couldn't look away. A small section of the floor gave way with a loud crack, and from that darkness, one hand emerged. No, not a hand. It was some grotesque mockery of one, elongated fingers pale and twisted, all stretched out over bone. It clawed at the floor, pulling itself up. Her mind was yelling at her to run, to get up and run from the house, and as far away as she possibly could. But her body had frozen in terror. The thing pulled itself out of the hole in the floor, and she saw before her a hideous form, a humanoid shape twisted into some expression of rage and hunger. Its eyes, milky white and empty, locked onto her. The creature snarled at her gutturally and lunged. Just in time, Emily shook her head free, just as the creature's claws were poised to plunge into her side. She shot upright, adrenaline coursing through every trembling limb. The thing, whatever it was, turned toward her, moving with unnatural speed, its limbs jerking and twitching as it stalked toward her. Turning, she ran to the door and slammed it shut behind her. Her mind ran for what she should do. There was no way she could fight that creature. She had to get out of there. She started running, down the hall, moving towards the front door. As she stretched out to touch the handle, she hesitated, scratching. This time, though, it wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from the walls. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned, sweeping the room about her with eyes. The walls, once solid and intimate, bulge now, as if the house itself is living. Dark shapes move just beneath the surface of the wallpaper, outlines indistinguishable in the poor lighting. Emily stepped back. What was happening? The house, the thing. It wasn't in the floor at all. It was inside everything. The front door swung open and slammed against the wall with a crack that made the house shudder. Emily froze as the air chilled, and from the dark outside she saw them. Figures, hundreds of them. They moved in sync, their bodies contorted and twisted, their eyes blank and dead. They shuffled toward her, their steps slow but deliberate, as if they were puppet strings with each tug being manipulated by the pulleys of some monstrous cranking machine. And it wasn't until then that she understood. The house had summoned them. It had called out to them from whatever hellhole they slumbered in. She was caught. Emily ran, pounding on the floor with her feet as she made her way through the back of the house. The walls pulsed and throbbed, and the wooden floor creaked beneath her footsteps. The air was heaped with filth and stench of rotting decay. Behind her, the dragging footsteps across the floor and the labored breathing filled the night air. She fumbled with the lock on the back door, but throwing it open ruined all her hopes. More of them! They stood motionless in the backyard, waiting, their heads locked into an eerie synchrony as they turned to face her, their dead eyes fixed on her soul. Emily stumbled backward, her body shaking at every limb. There was no escape. The house, the creatures, it all had come alive. The walls of the house creaked and groaned, the floor splintering under her feet as the figures closed in. The last thing she saw was the monstrous face of the creature from the floor, grinning as it reached for her as the darkness closed in over her.